Hi, today I want to show you how to save money on pastel paper. This is 400 UArt sanded. I buy it by the roll. If you buy a 9 by 12 sheet of this, it costs you about $3 to $3.50 per sheet. I'm going to show you how you can make your own pastel paper and save tons and tons of money. This paper is like the gold standard for a lot of artists. You can press hard and fill in all those little spaces. You can cross hatch. You can do it lightly and blend over the top. You can make it blend really easy. We're going to come pretty close to this gold standard for you today. To do this at home yourself and to try out what's going to work for you and for the style and the effects that you want with your pastels, I recommend you get many different brushes. This is a cheap hobby brush, but it's got a fine, the bristles are cut off, they're trimmed. It makes a really nice even brush stroke when I use it with acrylics or watercolor or anything. This is a foam pad, just cheap foam pads out of your paint store, hardware store. The wider the brush, the better when you're experimenting. And once you find the surface that you like, then you'll be able to use and coat the surface more evenly with a wider brush. The other item we're going to use today is clear gesso. They make many different kinds of gesso. All gessos are not created the same. I usually buy Liquitex by the gallon, but I have this little travel pack of Holbein clear gesso. Now they do make a clear gesso that is not for pastel, that has no pumice in it. So what you want to look for is you want to look for clear gesso with pumice or with texture that can be used as a pastel ground. The other thing I'm going to do for you in this video is show you the different substrates you can put this clear gesso on and the way you apply it and the different effects you'll get with the different brushes. I'm interested to find out too. I've never used a foam brush. But I'm going to use some pen and ink paper. I'm going to use some Sumi Japanese calligraphy paper. It's kind of lightweight. The pen and ink paper is 140, and we'll get to see what the buckling effect is. Now you know, if you've got a framer, somebody or an artist friend, if you have an artist friend who frames their own work, they'll have many cutoffs of their mat board. They'll cut out the centers, they'll cut off the edges. That's what this is a piece of illustration board. Then I'm going to use a piece of regular foam board, not gator board. I'm just going to use a piece of regular foam board and we'll texture it up for you. And last but not least, cardboard, or sometimes called tag board. This is not corrugated. I don't recommend you use corrugated because you'll get those lines no matter how much gesso you put on. But believe it or not, I was in the Ossé Museum in Paris, France, and they had a bunch of works on cardboard. Cardboard is not archival, and people freak out about something not being archival, but guess what? Once you put gesso on there, then your surface is archival. The substance that's holding the surface is not, but you know what? Guess what? If it's good enough for Paris museums, it's going to be good enough for you. All right? Besides, somewhere down the future, if yours makes it into a museum or it needs to be restored, you're giving somebody a job. A conservationist is going to need a job. So don't worry too much, especially if you're planning to do a study. Last but not least is this paper I got free. I got a big stack of it, and these things are huge. Look at that. These things are huge. Imagine if you could turn something like this into a surface that you enjoy painting on. It's free. You just got the cost of the gesso and the time and learning the technique in order to make the surface that you want to paint on. This is an enamel paper, what printers use to make magazine covers. It's a little heavier than your regular Sports Illustrated or Pastel journal. It's a little closer to the paper used in Streamline's publishing of Connoisseur Fine Art magazine. But it is a little thicker. And It will not, if you saw my video on the perfect pastel paper, it will not accept pastel. I can mark on this all day and there'll be a little bit of color there, but it's gone. It does not stick. It has no tooth. So we're going to take this to see what the tooth looks like when I paint on the gesso using the different brushes. So let's get started. Okay, I'm going to start with the enamel paper. This is the scrap paper that I got for free, and you can see some of the shine. And the pastel does not stick to this at all. So you'll be able to see when I do this example with different brushing techniques, you'll be able to see maybe what one you want to try to start out with and experiment with. You don't get the Liquitex with pumice or the Holbein with pumice. Make sure whatever brand you're using has that. Okay, here we go. I'm going to use the chip brush first, and the clear gesso will dry kind of frosty. Now, I know what kind of texture, because I use these chip brushes all the time. I know what kind of texture this is going to leave. This is going to leave brush strokes with ridges. And what I'm going to do is tip this in here and spread it out. And then very lightly, I'm going to go this way on it, and that will take some of those ridges out. So as it dries, it'll be a little bit smoother. You can also put 2 coats of this on and use a light 120 or 400 or even a 220, but you could use a 400 sandpaper and take off the ridges if even this method is too much texture for you. And the foam brushes, like I said, this is the one I'm interested in, the foam brush, because I have tried foam brushes using paint and I get a smoother surface. But I don't know what it'll turn out with gesso. This is the one I've never tried, so I'm really interested to see what this is like. I can warn you right away, if you want a perfectly smooth surface that's uniform, then yes, you're going to have to buy sanded, or you're going to have to go to a paper with a uniform tooth. But if you're looking to get some paper and you like texture and you're not after perfectly smooth surface because you like the way the texture provides ridges from the different strokes, then this could be something that could save you a ton of money, because like I said, just a 9 by 12 UART piece of paper pre-cut is over $3. So that's our foam brush. I'll use the same layout on other papers that I demo. I'll have the synthetic fiber, the foam brush, and the chip. So if you can't read these because I've moved it around to paint it, then just be aware that that's the order. The synthetic, the foam's in the middle, and then the chip. So I'm going to paint this so you can see what the texture will be, because this is perfectly smooth paper. And when I run the pastel from right to left or left to right, I'll try to keep the even pressure, and you'll be able to see what that texture does as it goes across these different finishes. And again, I'm going both ways, and now I'm lightening up the pressure. These are really good and give you a nice smooth, well, for me, I consider it smooth enough finish on any piece of paper, cardboard or mat board, or even foam board. And this is called tipping. Painters use this technique to smooth out some of the brush strokes if they have a flowing agent that makes things flow across evenly. I'm going to switch to the rough side of this sumi, of this Japanese paper. One side is really smooth and the other side has a lot of texture, and the fibers really show well. It's machine made, I'm sure, and unfortunately it didn't have a weight on it, so I can't tell you, but it's very close to the 140 weight. So we'll use the synthetic brush again. I'm going to paint over this, and I've got to put it on thicker here because the paper is soaking up that gesso. I've got to put it on really thick in comparison to that enamel. That enamel took very little gesso. So I'm going to go both ways on this also, and I'll lighten up after I've got it covered and I've gone both ways. I will try to lighten this up a little bit and do that brush tipping, which takes out some of the strokes. This does not have any flowing agent in it, so unlike paint, you're not going to get a perfectly smooth surface. Now we're to the foam brush on this. I'll load it up heavily. See how this is clear? It lets that word foam come through. You could easily put pencil or pen and ink underneath this gesso and it'll show through and give you guidelines. Now we're going to go back to the chip brush that has all those rough edges. You see how the fibers are not even on it. We'll load this up, and again I'll go just lightly the other direction, and I'll probably go one more time lightly this way, but brush it on heavy and then you can tip it if you want. A lot of times I don't even tip the piece that I'm gessoing because I really like a rough finish. This is that chipboard, the cardboard. You see it's not corrugated, but it's real thick. So if you have a source for this, you can use this. There's nothing wrong with using non-archival materials to do your sketches and studies and as you're learning. And if you get a real good one, a lot of times the pressure's off and you will get a real good one because you have not thought about, oh gosh, this is a $3 piece of paper, don't dare ruin it, and then you all freeze up and it isn't any good because you're worried about painting the best you can on this expensive substrate. So this might free you. This very well might free you to make mistakes. And if you get a good one, the surface you're painting on is archival. So, like I said, a conservator sometime in the future will have a job because 100 years from now somebody will say, well, this is starting to fall apart behind the painting, and somebody will fix it for you. So here's that foam brush on this tag board or chipboard. I should use the chip brush on the chipboard, shouldn't I? And again, I'm going to go both ways. I'm not waiting for these coats to dry. I'm just trying to apply the gesso as evenly as I can. But you notice I'm not like painstakingly trying to get it exactly even, because as I said, if this is too rough and I've gone both directions on it, I could knock off some of the high spots with a piece of sandpaper. But as you can see, and this is not dry yet, as you can see that color of that chipboard coming through. And again, so that makes it really easy for you to put a drawing underneath. If you find that you can make the surface you want just using clear gesso with pumice and the brush that you find that you want to use. Now I have rolled on with a roller, with a fine nap roller, but I don't like that. So I'm not even going to show that to you, but it gives you kind of an eggshell, pebbly finish, and for me it's just too uniform. But you might like that uniformity, so try a roller if you're trying to experiment and want to see what these surfaces look like. This is the foam board. It comes in sheets. I usually buy the 3/16. Nothing special about this. It is not gator board, which is more durable. I have had where I have used a hose to wash off an old painting to paint on top, and if I soak it too long I'll get a little delamination around the edges. But it's not enough that painting clear gesso on there is going to delaminate any of the edges. So I wouldn't worry about delamination, but it will buckle a little bit. The bigger you get it, the more you will see a curve. What happens is you're painting something on one side. It'll do this with paint too, house paint. Then you will get quite a bit of buckling, because what happens is the surface is adhering to the product, and then as it dries it shrinks and wants to buckle upwards on the outside edges. So just be aware that you will get some buckling, but on smaller pieces, 16 by 20 and under, I would say that you would be able to paint gesso on one side of it and not have to worry about what little buckling there is. You can usually weight them down, like I said, or you can stick them in a frame, and with good frame points that will pull it in without hardly any noticing. It wouldn't be like a 30 to 40. You would probably get too much buckling on it. But you could use a thicker foam board for like 1/2 inch foam board for a 30 to 40 if you like this surface. I personally like it. I do a lot of gessoing up of these foam board pieces and painting directly on them. I wanted to say something about this sketch paper. This is made by Yasumoto and Company, and it is Japanese and looks like it's got a San Francisco address. But this is just a sketch pad for sumi drawing, and the paper, as I said, has the most texture of all the samples I'm trying. So what I'm going to do is I use the rough side to put the gesso on, and as you saw, it soaked up a lot of the gesso, so it takes a lot more gesso. But the nice thing about this, and I can share this experience, the nice thing about this, see how limber this is? This has no starches in it. Many times your drawing papers will have a sizing or a starch sizing in it. It's probably not starch, but it has a sizing in it that makes it stiffer, kind of like a starch shirt collar. But this stuff is very limp. I have done the same thing putting gesso on pieces of etching paper that were 100% cotton etching paper, and I have found that the paper that doesn't have a sizing dries flatter. This is almost all the way dry. It's got a little interior moisture left in it, but the surface is dry, and it is almost as flat as it was coming out of the pad. So I'm taking, if I were to turn this blue pastel, I'm trying to find something that wasn't bright blue so you can see the skips and jumps over the texture, and I will put moderate pressure on and at an angle, and you'll see there's very little difference. This is the chip brush. There's a few more skips and jumps on that than the foam, and the foam and synthetic look about the same. I'm going to put another scratch across here and press a little bit harder. And now I'm going to go up and down, up and down, and up and down. This one, the chip brush, has larger skips. These are pretty uniform, but there's not much difference really. Now I'll use the end of the pastel and go to an angle to the brush strokes, since I went horizontal and vertical. This foam is filling in nicer than this. This gives me way more jumps and little white areas. But I think in this case the synthetic is actually, the synthetic white bristle brush is filling in all the gaps faster. So you can see they're going to give you skips and jumps, but you can make it, and again, I didn't sand this, but you could sand this off and I bet this would fill in nicely. I'll just keep adding some strokes. I'll add some strokes there. You can see it fills in with the synthetic. So if you're looking for a smoother surface, the synthetic fiber brush is the one on this heavier surfaced paper. It had a beginning texture that I didn't even need to put gesso on. It would have taken up pastel without it. And just to prove it, there's no gesso up in here. Look at that. That's the paper without even any gesso on it. Now, here's your enamel paper. Look at that. It will not take anything. It does not take anything, and I can wipe that right off, what little stuck to the surface. Here's our chip brush. We go from the chip brush. I've got a pretty strong pressure on this. This is across our foam. This is across our synthetic. And again, I think the synthetic brush has less texture than trying to use the foam brush. This again, the chip brush, naturally, because it's uneven bristles, is giving us more. I'm going to go double this time. This paper, this enamel paper, has some buckles in it, but I think they would press out if you put it underneath an even weight. So here's our double. And again, the most texture is the chip. The foam is our second most texture. I've got more white skips and jumps, as I call them, than I do here with the synthetic fiber brush. But look what I can do. I can fill in all those, even on the coarsest one. So again, you're going to have to see by painting and drawing on this what you want. Crosshatch. The synthetic fiber, even on the smooth paper that picks up nothing, is probably the smoothest texture you're going to get. Now in this case, this paper doesn't have any tooth. So if I had a supply of something slick and it wasn't taking any tooth and I wanted to create my own paper, I could do it because this was free paper. It's just the cost of a few ounces of gesso compared to $3 a sheet. You do the math. This is our foam board. I used the synthetic brush on it, so there's no comparison here, but you can see how even that texture is when I go both ways and I tip it. When I do the painting technique called tipping, where you lightly go across to take off some of the ridges, but there's plenty of texture there to paint with. I can keep adding tons and tons of pastel on that before I fill up the texture. Here's our comparison. This is the UArt sanded. You know what? Those are really, really close to one another. I really have enjoyed the white, evenly cut off, cheap hobby synthetic fiber bristle brushes. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed the testing of trying to use different brushes to see what the different texture is for a really, really cheap 89-cent chip brush from a big box hardware to a hobby brush that's maybe $1 or $2 to the more sophisticated foam brush that's supposed to be with paints. It makes a smoother surface, but as we saw, the synthetic brush does better. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you're enjoying the videos, please hit the subscribe button. So until next time, happy painting, and we'll have another topic for you to learn about how to paint with pastels. Bye bye.